Hi everybody and welcome back to Exotics of the World TV. Now in this episode we are going to walk you through the basic care of Amazon milk frogs. So please, as always, sit back, relax and enjoy the content. Just like their name suggests, these animals are endemic to the Amazon rainforest. Specific countries that you can find them in are like Brazil, Peru, Venezuela, a lot of those countries that have got like the Amazon flowing through them. The habitat that you can typically find these animals in is going to be rainforested type areas with lots of high humidity, along with them being typically found quite close to water sources. So how are we going to care for these guys in captivity? So as a minimum, we would always recommend having 2 or 3 Amazon milk frogs in kind of like a group because they are quite social with each other. And the actual enclosure size for that group, the minimum we would recommend would be 45 centimeters by 45 centimeters by 60 centimeters tall. However, if you did want to go for larger groups, we would definitely recommend having a larger enclosure. These frogs can get to a fairly decent size, with males typically reaching around about 3 to 4 inches, whereas females getting around about 4 to 5, and also being a little bit more chunkier. Now, are there any risks in terms of cohabitation? Well, yes, there are risks. There's always going to be risks. So the main risk is always make sure that your frogs are roughly a similar size. Otherwise, you will definitely end up with one big frog. Also, around like breeding season and stuff, the males can sometimes like mob the females a little bit. So just make sure that the females are eating and they're maintaining weight and not losing any. Moving on to cleaning. Now, this is going to depend on what type of enclosure you have. So is it bioactive or is it not bioactive? If you're not going for a bioactive enclosure, then you're going to need to do a little bit more in terms of your cleaning and your maintenance. The first point being is making sure that that substrate is definitely changed. With these animals coming from high humid environments, the likelihood of like a bacterial or a fungal buildup is quite high. So therefore, it is your duty to make sure that you have a look. If you see that the substrate is going a little bit gross, or if you're overspraying it and it's become a little bit waterlogged, you need to know as and when. There's not going to be a specific one-size-fits-all rule with this. This is completely different when we're talking about bioactive enclosures. The whole theory and idea around bioactivity is that essentially it cleans itself. Now, the only thing that doesn't get cleaned in both of these instances is the glass. These frogs are big and they're going to go to the toilet quite a lot. And their turds are quite large as well. So you're going to need to make sure that the glass is nice and clean. Now, what can you use, especially because it's a frog, they are quite sensitive. Now, what you're going to use to clean the glass with. So I always find like a diluted white vinegar solution is definitely the best way to clean the glass. And once the glass is cleaned, just give it a once over with your spray bottle, just so you can get rid of any residue of the white vinegar. Let's now talk about the heating and lighting of these enclosures. So let's just say we have got a standard 45 by 45 by 60 tall enclosure. We would always recommend giving these animals like a small-ish basking spot. You can do this by using like mini halogens, smaller lamps, that type of thing. We'd recommend a basking spot of around about 27 to 29 degrees with a top ambient temperature of around about the same. So you kind of want to be going for like the 25 to 27 in kind of like the top section of the enclosure. Towards the bottom end of the enclosure, you're going to want it more so like 24. So this is what we would typically recommend in the daytime. On a nighttime, however, just turn it down to 20 degrees or so. You don't really want to be dropping these animals lower than 20 degrees constantly. On the odd occasion, if it does drop to like 19 or 18, realistically, you're going to be absolutely fine. We tend to find that animals that are like on the equator, the temperature doesn't really drop on a nighttime that much below 20 degrees. So keep it at that. If your house, if you're in the UK or anywhere else that's cold in the world, if you do find that your house is dropping below that on a nighttime, we would recommend getting some sort of ambient bulb in there. Something very similar to a CHE or a ceramic heat emitter. But the ceramic heat emitter should only be used on a nighttime for ambient. This is not a substitute to replace the basking spot. So are we going to be having any other forms of light in this enclosure? Yes. we would always recommend any vertebrate should have access to UVB. Now, the type of UVB, this is going to depend on your enclosure itself. So how tall it is, but again, if we're going to base it on a 45, 60 tall enclosure, then we would say use a Ferguson Zone 1 bulb. This is going to be absolutely fine and isn't going to fry your animals. Another type of light source that we definitely 100% would recommend is LED. Now, this is going to be really beneficial for your frog's overall vision. And also, if you decide to go for live plants, maybe later down the line, if you don't want to go full bioactive, but you just want to whack a few live ones in there, then the LED are going to help with that plant growth. So with these animals coming from like a really high humidity rainforest, you guessed it, the humidity is going to be quite high. So we wouldn't really recommend dropping that humidity anything lower than kind of like 65. A nice happy sweet spot for us would be anywhere between 70 to 80%. Now, just because these guys like it nice and humid doesn't mean that they like a boggy swamp at the bottom of the enclosure.
I'm all Greg. Pleased to meet you.
So just make sure that you're not overspraying. Are we going to need anything to control any of these lights or anything like that inside this enclosure? So yes, you can get thermostats that will control all of your heating and your lighting, or you can just get a thermostat that's going to control the heating elements, and you can just get like the normal like switcher off plugs, like the kind of like dial ones, or you can get digital ones that will help turn off your light sources. Now, let's talk about thermostats. Thermostats are very, very important. So these are going to stop that enclosure from overheating. As soon as it gets to a certain point, the thermostat is going to kick off. Now, because we recommend using light emitting heat sources, we would say that the appropriate thermostat to go along with that is going to be a dimming thermostat. So there are other thermostats that are available, like pulse proportional and on-off. Those two you can use with your CHE. Preferably the pulse proportional should be used with the CHE, but you can arguably get away with using a on-off stat on it. Now, something that a lot of people tend to get mixed up with the thermostat is the thermometer. So we'd always recommend having thermometers and hygrometers in this enclosure. And in terms of like what brands and stuff to get, you can get near enough any brand. It's absolutely fine. They're all going to roughly do the same thing. What I would say is, though, is fork out for that little bit extra. I would always recommend getting like a mid-range brand that's digital. The little dial ones are okay if you just kind of like want a rough estimate in the enclosure, but if you want to be a little bit more accurate, go for like a mid-ranged digital thermometer. And that also goes for a hygrometer as well, so the thing that's going to measure the humidity inside your enclosure. Now, a good way to tell the difference between thermostats and thermometers is that your thermostat, as a general rule, is going to control the temperature, whereas the thermometer is going to tell you the temperature. Now, there are some thermostats that do both. However, for the most part, most people still use the analog ones. Now, a common question that we get asked here is what substrate is best? Now, I say there isn't really a golden rule to this. It's whatever you kind of like, as long as you're using similar kinds of substrate. So I always like to use like topsoils and cocoa fibers in with my light enclosures and setups and stuff. As you see, I'm probably a bit more of a natural bug. But yeah, anything like that is absolutely fine. If you just want to use cocoa fiber, go ahead. Cocoa fiber is a really good fibrous substrate that's really going to absorb some of that moisture. And then on the nighttime, it's going to release that moisture into the air, creating a really nice humidity gradient. Also, the thicker the substrate, the easier the enclosure is going to be at regulating that humidity within it. Now, if you're going for kind of like a bioactive kind of feel for it with all that the live plants and stuff, then I wouldn't recommend just using cocoa fiber, because cocoa fiber isn't nutrient dense. It's virtually got no nutrients in it whatsoever. So I would always say go for like a brand like the Arcadia Earth Mix, for example. I mean, I like to use the Arcadia Earth Mix and the ProRep BioLife in sync with each other because I think they complement each other quite well. Now, in terms of decoration, so this is where your artistic flair really is going to come out. It's completely up to you. Again, like I've previously said, I'm more of a natural bug, so I prefer my enclosures to be live planted, lots of rocks, logs, branches, trailing plants, that type of thing. If you want to use plastic, it's okay. I definitely would push you preferably more towards the more naturalistic side of things, but I might be a little bit biased. But yeah, so branches, rocks, logs, anything that frog can utilize that it can interact with in a safe way should be absolutely fine. Let's now talk about these frogs' diet. So these will eat near enough anything they can get their mouths around. We do tend to find that frogs usually aren't that picky at all. So what we tend to feed them here is, when they're babies, kind of like pinhead crickets, moving up to small crickets, small locusts, anything that they can kind of fit in their mouth is absolutely fine. Moving on to when they are adults, you can give them larger prey items like dubia roaches, those types of things. So they're going to eat a wide variety. Now, just be careful that you do not overfeed the frog. So this is something that we tend to find especially when people's frogs come here on holiday with us. We're like, maybe just knock the crickets and stuff on the head a little bit. I know it happens in White's tree frogs, so it more than likely probably will happen with these guys as well. When they get too fat, they can sometimes develop like a fatty film like over their eye. It could be applied potentially to Amazon milk frogs. Unsure, we'll probably have to do a little bit more research into that. But in general, obesity is a really big killer of reptiles in the captive environment nowadays. So just make sure that you are limiting their food intake. Also, with their food intake, please make sure that you do put calcium and multivitamin powders on them. So it's going to depend on the age of your frog and what supplements you have available to you within the world. So I would always suggest going to your local reptile specialist and talking to them and seeing what they can come up with some sort of like dietary and supplementation regime and plan. And that about wraps us up for this video. So thank you very much for paying attention and sticking along with the ride with us. If you have any questions, please feel free to message them in the comment section down below. And please make sure that you do give us a like, share, and subscribe. But anyway, that's been enough from me. Thank you very much for listening. Gracias por escucharnos.